As long as there has been tractor manufacturers, they have been gathering intelligence about each other, and that's the topic of our discussion today. They would spy on each other in any way they could to learn about what new machinery was coming and what were the strengths and weaknesses of those machines. For starters, we're going to hear from Bud Youle, who talks about the 2+2 tractor and how secret that was. I looked back at our research, and Bill Schubert, who was the engineer for that, discussed the fact there was only 5 or 6 prototypes. And Bud's going to talk about the fact that those early production units and prototypes were kept very, very secret.
Very, very few people in the harvester company knew we were building this tractor. I mean, we take it out on field test. We had our own truck. We had our own people. And Lee, I've got to say that it was so well kept secret that we would stand at crossroads and count the cars and farmers' trucks that go by before we would go to Mr. Smith or Mr. Jones's place to put it in the field to run it.
The funnest stories I hear are about how the two companies would try to find out what was going on with each other. Do you guys have some stories of some of the espionage or how it was done back in those days? How you would find out what's the competition doing?
Well, there were a couple of ways to kind of get an idea of what was going on. The IH combine plant obviously was in East Moline, right beside the John Deere combine plant, and the two engineering groups were a chain link fence apart from each other. So you could walk up on the dike. There's a big tall dike along the Mississippi River, and you could walk behind the Deere plant. You could occasionally see some new and different things, but invariably we would find out from some of the local truckers, hey, there's a big old combine out at the Geneseo truck stop. You guys should go out and look at it. So a bunch of us would hop in a car with our tape measures and our cameras and run out and crawl all over these things. Of course, it was public property. There was no problem with that. However, if the driver came out and threatened to blow your backside full of buckshot, you'd move on pretty quickly and wait for another signal to come along. But then we would also, and maybe some of you folks that spend more time in the field than I did, we would get phone calls from either field service people, field marketing people, occasionally from a dealer that we knew in the area, and say, hey, there's a John Deere prototype combine over here. You guys should come and look at it. So someone from the engineering team usually would run over and fly over, as the case may be, and see if we could figure out where it was and when we could get a look at it. And every once in a while, in the early stages, it was not uncommon to have all these combines with big panels and doors on them secured with padlocks. So if you found that situation, well, you were pretty much up the creek, but the padlocks weren't always locked. So you'd flip up the doors, you'd look at them and take all kinds of pictures. And in those days, of course, you had to wait for a day or two for the local drugstore to develop your pictures, not like today. And, we'd measure and sketch and whatever and come back home. It was, I guess you call it industrial espionage. It happened, we found the Deere machines, we found the New Holland machines, we'd find the Agco machines. I have no doubt they found ours as well. We didn't always know about it, but that's how you tried to get a feel of where was the industry going. And a lot of those prototypes that we found never saw the light of day. It was early in the program, and after a year or two of in-field harvesting, yeah, that's not the approach they're going to take. So you had to kind of be careful that you didn't lock your future to everything you saw, but you had to be aware of what was coming.
To Don's point, what was interesting from a field perspective or from a marketing perspective, as social media started to mature, you just had to, all you had to do was look on Facebook or whatever, and guys will find this stuff for you. But it was interesting. People say, "Oh God, they found our test machine. That's terrible." I looked at it a little differently. In a lot of cases, I looked at that as a compliment. Our customers are looking at this saying, "God, these guys continue to develop." So sometimes what would be considered a negative um, turned out to be a positive in a lot of customers' minds that said these guys are still continuing to develop. And it's kind of a left-handed compliment.
One thing I would add to the whole development process, over the years, especially if you're involved in product development from concept to launch, a lot of times, the company may come up with a unique idea or a concept, looks good in theory, but it may not work that well in reality. And other concepts look a little skeptical, but it actually ends up performing very well, and it may completely make it through the development process and into production. So just because you see something doesn't mean it actually is going to go to market. So the development process has to play out, and there's fundamentals that have to be achieved in it.
Excellent. Well, it certainly makes for at times good stories. The story of Bud Youle sneaking into the Superdome. We're not going to go into that here, but he did that. He snuck into a John Deere convention and got caught. It's a fun story. I'd urge you to look at Snoopy and the Spy for that. We're going to go to other stories today, but there has been, certainly the espionage is part of it. That's I think for myself from the outside, it's fun to reflect on. Our last bit today on tractor spying is a gem from our archives from a man named George Russell. George Russell he's an industry consultant. He's worked for pretty much everybody in this business, been around a long time, very smart man and knows a lot. He worked for Case IH doing competitive intelligence. That means he was paid to go spy, right? And during that time, he worked for a man named Bob Carlson. Bob Carlson, well known in the industry as Tractor Bob, worked for John Deere for many years, also came to Case IH for a while. Bob, much loved guy, and George has a great story about his experiences working as a tractor spy.
When Bob Carlson came into the company, and he really wanted to have something that was innovative to show, to illustrate that Case IH was really moving. And I worked with him because one of my jobs was in competitive intelligence. It was the most fun I ever had in the company, was being in charge of competitive intelligence. And I had found in Deere's testing locations, there are 500, 6,000, 6,000, 7,000, and 8,000 series tractors. And I had furnished some of the information and sat in Carlson's office. And I don't know if you remember going to the farm show when Case IH had this thing where they flew banners around called "Stop on Green, Go on Red." It gave little. This is all Carlson's idea. So what I had found, and this was out in the Central Valley of California, that I think it was a Deere 7000 series tractors had an aluminum housing on the transmission. And I remember finding this at night, and there's a whole other story that you probably don't want to hear about what happened. But I snuck out there, I found it, I came back the next day, and the Deere guys were on to me. But we did find out it had an aluminum transmission, and so Carlson had us put together this little quiz, this little card that we gave to farmers coming up to the exhibit to go ask your competitors about different things. And it was all about vulnerabilities, and there were some little pins that said "Stop on Green, Go on Red." It was all to make Deere look bad and really say, we're just as good as you guys, meaning the red guys.
Concludes episode 5. Really enjoyed this discussion of tractor spying. There's a lot more stories like this in my books. All of my books, this is one of my favorite topics, is how people gather intelligence in the ag business. And there's a lot of stories you would find in any of my books, really, all the ag books. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for the time. Come back for next week, because we are going to be talking about FEREC, which is International Harvester's incredible engineering research facility. So that's going to be a great discussion. We will see you next week.